Well, you've been called a highly credible witness, but even today, some people remain skeptical of your story.
This was not an interview of Christine Blasey Ford. This was a slumber party. It was a full body massage. 6 years ago, Christine Blasey Ford delivered testimony that was completely uncorroborated, completely unbelievable, and had millions of holes in it that was just completely impossible to verify. It was meant to kill the Supreme Court nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. She was used by Democrats and pro-abortion activist groups to try to keep Brett Kavanaugh off of the Supreme Court. Donald Trump, the president of the United States, and quite possibly the most heroic and courageous move he made in his entire presidency, stood by Brett Kavanaugh. And I guarantee you, there were advisors in that White House that said, Mr. President, the heat is too much on this. Even if Brett Kavanaugh is telling the truth, this is a Me Too thing. This has to do with sexual assault. It's just not worth it. Let's just move on. We got plenty of other justices that we can put in place. And Donald Trump said, no. Hold on. You just said, even if it's not true. If it's not true, why would we do this to this good man? No. We'll stand by him unless they deliver real evidence that shows that this is true. I'm not gonna abandon this man and throw him under the bus the way you do in Washington, D.C., and treat him like garbage under the guise of even if it's not true. And of course, he held his ground. Kavanaugh was confirmed, and he's on the Supreme Court today. Fast forward to yesterday, 6 years later. Christine Blasey Ford, the woman who delivered that testimony, appeared on The View. No one asked her a critical question. No one challenged anything about her story. No one even raised all of the doubts that had been raised 6 years ago and continue to remain unanswered to this day. Nope. This was not an interview of Christine Blasey Ford. This was a slumber party. It was a full body massage. Take a look at a little of it.
Yeah. So Brett Kavanaugh, he has continued to deny that he ever assaulted you. But you say, this is interesting, you say that the anger on his face during the hearings is imprinted on you forever. He was so angry with you for calling him out and ruining his pristine reputation. So how do you...
I gotta stop there. I gotta stop there because Joy Behar's interpretation of the anger on Brett Kavanaugh's face is communicated to her audience in this way. Brett Kavanaugh was really angry that day because he got called out. I don't know, Joy. I could be wrong here. I'm just spitballing. I'm just throwing something against the wall. We'll see if it sticks or not. Work with me on this. It's a hypothetical. Maybe I'm wrong. But maybe, just maybe, Brett Kavanaugh was angry that day because he had been falsely accused of rape. Would you be angry? I'd be angry. Why do I want to interrupt right here and interject this? Because I'm a man, and this could have happened to any man. I'm a father. This could have happened to any of our sons. If you're not as angry as Brett Kavanaugh was that day, there's something wrong with you, honestly. But that righteous anger that Brett Kavanaugh showed that day is now being, well, of course he was angry because he was called out. He was appropriately angry because he was falsely accused of the worst thing you can be accused of. And the fact that that isn't even considered by Joy Behar tells you what a partisan, ignorant hack she is. That said, let's hear what else she has to say.
You make sense of the fact that you were forced into hiding. People were threatening your life and your family's lives, while he is elevated to the nation's highest bench, making incredibly consequential decisions about lives, our lives, for example, and yours, particularly women's rights.
Yeah, it's really hard to come to terms with, and I had to just detach from the outcome a month before you saw me on TV because it was so stressful even thinking about it. and I didn't know what kind of impact it would have. And when he was confirmed, I just had to go into radical acceptance mode and accept that that was the outcome. But the lovely unexpected outcome was this outpouring from sexual assault survivors and citizens from around the world saying that they learned civic duty and patriotism and all the things that are important to all of us.
All right, a couple of things here. I'd love to know more about these death threats that apparently Christine Blasey Ford has had to endure. Have they been investigated? Has anyone been arrested? Is there any legitimacy to the claim of death threats? Because I do know one person who has actually had a legitimate death threat. That would be Brett Kavanaugh, where a man was arrested outside of his home with a backpack full of zip ties and weapons and a plan to kidnap him and his daughters and his wife and cause them physical harm. And the fact that that's not mentioned in this entire charade that's being presented to the American people, all of it, go into hiding, by the way, and have to be a recluse. She makes money on speaking gigs. She's been given awards. She was offered a special chair at the University of North Carolina. She's celebrated. Brett Kavanaugh is still vilified. Brett Kavanaugh still has people protesting outside of his home, and Merrick Garland's Justice Department does nothing about it, even though it's a violation of federal law. Where was the person on the panel of The View to point that out? More.
Holding the brick to open kind of a space for people that are strong enough to stand up, because Anita Hill did it. Then with that example, you are there if someone else needs to. You've made it a little easier for someone to come forward. But after all that you've been through, do you have any regrets? Would you do it all the same again?
I would definitely do it again. It was the worst thing ever. So I would do it again. It was terrible afterward for a couple of years. I had a couple of very bad years, but I survived it. It's survivable. And that's, people would say like, oh, they're going to ruin your life and say all these very abstract things. And I didn't really know what they meant. And so this book is a little bit, some concrete examples of what might happen and how people might better navigate it, because there will be another person.
Yeah.
Really fast, I just was wondering, those letters that you got, what was the percentage of men writing to you?
So there were probably 10% men. So we had bins called mail, and so that's where we would put the mail.
See, what men need to understand is that they have to step up and help us. We can't do this ourselves. I noticed that a lot. I watched when people were clapping. Some of the men did not clap in this audience.
And as many as 1 in 3 women will face sexual assault. So you're not by any means alone in this. What do you hope?
That's the conservative voice on the panel there, Alyssa Farah, who, by the way, worked for Vice President Mike Pence at the time of the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. I don't know if she volunteered that during this interview or talked about what her role was in this entire thing, because now she wants to be on the cool kids side of the fence. I love Joy Behar, by the way, publicly shaming the people in her own audience who don't actually apply, who actually see this entire thing play out and recognize the fraud that it is and see their own life pass before their eyes, because God forbid a woman shows up 30, 40 years later without any facts at hand and deliver this kind of testimony to try to ruin your life. Yeah, I'm be concerned about the men who do applaud this woman at this point. And I'm just not falsely accusing her of lies. We're going to break down all of the lies, major lies that she delivered in her testimony in just a moment, because of course, well, Joy Behar certainly didn't do that, did she? No one on that panel did. Listen to the question asked, though, by the conservative voice on the table, Alyssa Farah.
Readers take away from your book, if they take one thing away from it?
I think people hopefully will be able to relate to a lot of different things in the book, like what it's like to speak up in any setting and what it's like to face retaliation, and but also that it's survivable, and it's more important that we all find a way to be civil and respectful and listen to each other and support each other.
All right, there's more of this, but I just have to pause a moment here because we're getting into the substance of this and attacking her arguments and her substance. And I try not to get personal, but good God, her voice, what is with that? Why? Why is it always a way? Yes, thank you, emergency recovery coordinator. Oh my God. It's like listening to a 12-year-old girl with the vocal fry and the up-talking and the I'm going to take a moment here. I was going to wait until a little later, but let me just explain what's really going on here. Can I give you a little revelation? And it's all going to make sense. She's on The View to sell a book. 6 years after the events, she's selling a book. Now, Molly Hemingway from The Federalist co-authored a book with Carrie Severino about the Kavanaugh hearings and about what went on behind the scenes and blowing away all of the lies that Christine Blasey Ford said on the witness stand during her hearing. That book was released between 6 and 8 months after the Kavanaugh hearings. They got their book out pretty quickly. Why did it take her 6 years to get her book out? I'm going to tell you why. It didn't. It didn't take 6 years for her to get her book out. Her ghostwriter could have written this book and maybe even did write this book probably within a year of the hearings if they wanted to. The ghostwriter could have cranked this thing out for her and she could put her name on it. It didn't have to wait 6 years. Why did it wait 6 years? Well, take a look at her. Take a look at that picture of her. That's Christine Blasey Ford. Do you know who she reminds you of? Or I'll put it another way. Who does she iconically, physically represent to you? Christine Blasey Ford represents the last hope for the Biden candidacy and the Democrats retaining the White House this fall. Why did it take 6 years for this book to come out? It deliberately took 6 years to come out because 6 years later happens to be the presidential election year. This book came out right now at this time because the Democrats and the media and the book publishers and Joe Biden have an election to win. And Christine Blasey Ford, everything about her is exactly what Joe Biden and the Democrats need to win the election. There are 3 demographic groups in this country right now who are voting for Donald Trump, some of them in overwhelming fashion. Single men, married men, and married women. There is one demographic group that is overwhelmingly voting for Joe Biden and the Democrats, and that's single women. The difference maker in this election is Christine Blasey Ford and millions of other women like her. Married, professional, suburban, educated women. She represents what Biden needs. And she is being trotted out as a heroic victim that Donald Trump and Republicans and men just like your husband has tried to ruin. And all your friends on The View love her. You know that show you watch every day? Do you want to be on her wrong side? She's just like your best friend. Do you want to make an enemy of her? Of course not. She's just like me. She's just like my friends that I drink Chardonnay with once a week when we play Boggle. I stand by Christine Blasey Ford 6 years later, and there's no way I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. That's why all of this is happening. And boy, oh boy, did the ladies on The View do their part.
Yes. Well, you've been called a highly credible witness, and you have a PhD in psychology. You're a professor. You teach at Palo Alto and Stanford universities. But even today, some people remain skeptical of your story. And you write that during the hearing, Senator Lindsey Graham wouldn't even make eye contact with you. Were you prepared for that kind of response?
I was prepared ahead of time that none of the Republicans were going to speak with me and they were going to use an outside interviewer. And so I was actually surprised at how kind some of the other Republican senators were who broke that protocol and said hello.
Who was that? Can you name a good one?
Senator Flake and Senator Sass both came over and said
Neither one
hello.
is in Congress anymore, right?
But still a credit.
Yeah,
Yes,
credit.
good for them.
Both good men.
Yeah, those are the good ones, the ones that we don't have to worry about anymore, who aren't in Congress. By the way, they hated Ben Sass when he was there. The only thing they liked about him was that he opposed Donald Trump. They hated Jeff Flake, too. And Jeff Flake only did that sort of thing and opposed Donald Trump. And I think eventually ended up voting for Kavanaugh, by the way. Both of them did. Jeff Flake only decided to oppose Donald Trump publicly and vociferously when he decided that he wasn't going to run for re-election. Okay. Those are the only good Republicans that the ladies on The View will enjoy. And that's the only kind of Republican that Christine Blasey Ford will say anything nice about. But my favorite part of this entire thing was at the very beginning, this part.
And you have a PhD in psychology. You're a professor. You teach at Palo Alto and Stanford universities.
You see, they're using credentials to show that, listen, she got a PhD. She teaches at Stanford. She wouldn't lie. Right? If you're educated and you have degrees, you would never lie. Who lies if they've got all those degrees? I mean, okay, maybe Anthony Fauci. And then there's this.
But even today, some people remain skeptical.
Even today, some people remain skeptical. The majority of Americans remain skeptical. Well, not just skeptical. We think she's a liar. Why? Well, let's get back to the aforementioned Molly Hemingway, who, as I said, along with Carrie Severino, wrote that book. It's called Justice on Trial. She gave equal time, or she wasn't given equal time on The View, of course, but she gave her response on the X platform. And let's just go through this line by line, shall we? It's pretty exhaustive. There's no evidence that Ford and Kavanaugh ever met. Think about that for a minute. She is accusing him of sexual assault when they were teenagers 40 years ago. And there is no evidence that they ever even met. Not that they were ever in the same room together, that they ever met. She could provide no evidence to prove that she even knew Brett Kavanaugh. Number two, Leland Kaiser, who is the supposedly the girl that Christine Blasey Ford identified as being in the house the day that this event happened, she said she had no confidence in any of her friend's story. Number three, friends pressured Ms. Kaiser to change her story. Did you know that? Did you know? She came out and said, yeah, I don't remember this story ever happening. And suddenly friends all went after her and said, you can't do that. You kidding? We've got Roe v. Wade to protect here. Number four, all alleged witnesses strongly dispute the claim. Not just, oh, I don't recall. Not just, geez, my memory's foggy about that. No, every single person who was named by Christine Blasey Ford as a witness that could put her in the same house, the same room as Brett Kavanaugh, every single one of them strongly denied this ever happened. Number five, her own father supported the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh. Think about that for a minute. His daughter is saying that this guy raped her, and he's still supporting his confirmation for the Supreme Court. Ford doesn't know the location where it occurred. She could not give you the address. She could not give you the house. All she told you was the neighborhood, Chevy Chase, Maryland. I drive through Chevy Chase, Maryland every single day. There are thousands of houses in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Ford doesn't know how she got to this house where it allegedly occurred. She doesn't know how she got home from that house. Ford doesn't know the date or what time of week it happened. Ford somehow remembers, though, given all of those things she doesn't remember, she does remember that she had one beer, but nothing else. No other details. Kavanaugh's contemporaneous calendars support his claim that it never happened. You see, Brett Kavanaugh, and I don't know, maybe this is just one of those weird things that if you're this kind of person as a teenager in high school, you end up being on the Supreme Court. But as a teenager, he had these meticulous calendars where he would keep notes of all of his appointments and all of his things and practice and parties. And he would, after the fact, I guess like a diary, write down things that happened. There is no notation anywhere in any of those meticulously kept calendars that after school one day and after practice, he was at a house with a couple of friends. Nowhere, anywhere. They went through every single day. Christine Blasey Ford changed the date of the incident by years from her initial stories. Character witnesses from the time support Brett Kavanaugh. In other words, people who knew them at the time say Brett was a great guy. And by the way, those who knew Christine Blasey Ford, they said she was kind of, what's the word? Flaky, let's say. She was sort of flaky. Ford's first mention of Brett Kavanaugh's name, publicly recorded at any time whatsoever, is in 2012. Why? Because he became a national figure in 2012. Why? Because he was a lawyer that had worked in the Bush administration. And Mitt Romney had mentioned him potentially as a Supreme Court justice should he win the presidency. And suddenly, Christine Blasey Ford says, oh, I went to the sister school of his old boys school back in the day in Montgomery County, Maryland. And suddenly she starts talking about him. Number 15. False claims were made about Christine Blasey Ford's inability to fly. Remember when they wanted to fly her out to give her testimony? See, she resisted coming and doing the testimony, and we were told it was because she's afraid to fly. That's a lie. There's documented evidence that she took overseas trips. She flew to Europe with her family. She was not afraid of flying. Before she testified, she scrubbed all of her social media, which is a very suspicious move. She said she wanted to stay confidential, but the first call she made was to the Washington Post. That's not what a person who wants to hide her identity does. You don't go to the media immediately. Ford's attorney admitted they had a motive. Their motive was they wanted to have an asterisk next to Kavanaugh's name, just like Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas is probably one of the greatest Supreme Court justices this nation has ever had. And yet there are still people today, as you just heard in that segment on The View, where they talk about Anita Hill. Number 19, Ford has benefited politically, financially, and socially from this entire episode. And finally, nothing in Kavanaugh's past remotely similar to the claim. For 37 years, we're led to believe that this person did this thing when he was a teenager, and then for 37 years never did any other incident that matched this kind of behavior. Did any of that come up on The View? None of it did. None of it. Thank you, Molly Hemingway, for that exhaustive detailing. And I'll throw one more thing out there, because during the hearing, they said that she just wanted the truth to come out, and she just wanted it investigated. Well, when she finally picked up the phone and called somebody to blow the whistle on Brett Kavanaugh, she didn't call the FBI. She didn't call law enforcement. She called a politician. She called a Democrat. She called Senator Dianne Feinstein. That's not somebody who just wants the truth to get out. That's someone who acts politically. And the only reason that all of this is out in the open again is because they have an election to win.